The church was full, but Claire barely registered the people in it. She stood at the front, holding a single sheet of paper with words on it she had written and rewritten 4 times the night before, and she looked out at a room full of faces that all seemed to be waiting for her to say something that would make sense of the past 2 years. She couldn't. Daniel was she started, and then stopped, because the word she had written down, complicated, suddenly felt like the cruelest possible thing to say about her brother in a room full of people who had loved him. She tried again. Daniel was the most stubborn person I have ever known, she said instead, and a few people in the pews laughed quietly, the relieved laugh of people who needed permission to feel something other than grief for a moment. He held on to things. Ideas. Grudges. People. Her voice caught. Including me, for a lot longer than I deserved. She talked for another minute, mostly about their childhood, the treehouse their father had built that Daniel had refused to let anyone tear down even after it became structurally unsound, the way he used to sneak her extra dessert when their mother wasn't looking. She did not talk about the last 2 years. She did not talk about the fight that had ended their relationship, or the silence that followed it, or the fact that the last conversation she'd had with her brother had ended with both of them saying things they couldn't take back. She did not talk about any of that because she couldn't get through it without falling apart, and she had promised herself she would get through this. When she sat back down, her mother reached over and took her hand. Margaret Hale was 61 years old, and she sat through her son's funeral with a composure that Claire, in the moment, registered only distantly, a small, strange observation that surfaced and then sank back beneath the weight of everything else. Margaret's eyes were dry. Her hands were steady. She thanked people for coming with the same warm, measured grace she brought to everything, the same grace she'd brought to her husband's funeral, 11 years ago, when Claire and Daniel were teenagers and their whole world had rearranged itself around an empty chair at the dinner table. Claire remembered that funeral too. Remembered, specifically, something Daniel had said to her afterward, 15 years old, furious in a way she hadn't fully understood at the time, standing in the parking lot of the funeral home in his too big suit. Dad didn't just fall, Claire. People don't just fall. She had told him to stop. That he was scaring her. That their father had died in an accident, that the police had said so, that making it into something else wasn't going to bring him back. He had looked at her like she'd failed some kind of test. She hadn't thought about that moment in years. It surfaced now, in the pew, unbidden, and she pushed it back down where it had been living for over a decade. After the service, as people filed out into the grey afternoon, a man Claire didn't recognize approached her. He was in his 50s, with the kind of weathered, watchful face that made her think police before he even reached into his jacket. Claire Hale. Yes. Detective Reyes. He held out a card. I worked your brother's case. He hesitated, and something flickered across his face that Claire couldn't quite place. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. He held her gaze a moment longer than the exchange required. If anything comes up, he said. Anything you think of. Call me. Anytime. It was an accident, Claire said. It came out more like a question than she intended. Reyes didn't answer immediately. That's what the report says, he said finally. He nodded, once, and walked back toward his car, and Claire stood there holding a small white card with a phone number on it, feeling something she couldn't name settle into her chest like a stone dropped into still water. That evening, a woman from the building manager's office at Daniel's apartment dropped off a small cardboard box. Daniel's things, the few personal items that had been in his apartment, sorted and boxed by someone Claire had never met, handed over with the brisk, practiced gentleness of someone who did this often. She didn't open it that night. She set it on her kitchen counter and looked at it for a long time, and then she went to bed without eating dinner. Around 11, unable to sleep, she got up and opened the box. Books. A jacket that still smelled like him, which she had to set down quickly. A few framed photographs, one of their father, one of the two of them as kids on a beach somewhere, both of them missing teeth, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. And his phone. Screen cracked. Completely dead. Claire turned it over in her hands. She didn't know why she did what she did next. Habit. Mostly, the automatic gesture of someone who plugs in dead phones because that's simply what you do with dead phones. She found a charger that fit, plugged it in, and went to bed. She was nearly asleep when she heard it buzz on the counter. She almost ignored it. But something she would think about this moment many times in the weeks that followed, trying to identify what it had been made her get up and walk back into the kitchen. The screen had lit up, cracked but legible, showing a notification from 3 days ago. The day Daniel died. Missed video call 11 minutes. Mom. Claire stood in her dark kitchen, staring at the screen, and felt the floor of her understanding shift slightly beneath her. Her mother had told the police she hadn't spoken to Daniel in over a week. For 3 days, Claire didn't touch the phone again. She told herself it was nothing. People misremembered timelines during grief. Her mother had just buried a child. Of course the days had blurred together. An 11-minute call, 3 days before he died, probably meant nothing. Probably they'd talked about something ordinary. The weather. Whether Daniel was eating properly. The kinds of things mothers and estranged sons might still manage to talk about, even during a long silence. But the notification sat in her mind anyway, refusing to dissolve the way she wanted it to. On the 4th day, she picked the phone up again and tried to unlock it. She tried Daniel's birthday. Their father's birthday. The date of a family trip she remembered him talking about with unusual fondness. Nothing worked. The phone gave her 3 attempts and then locked her out for an hour, which felt, in the moment, like the cruelest possible design choice, a small digital wall standing between her and whatever was on the other side of it. She called Mara. Mara Delgado had been Daniel's closest friend for almost 15 years, the kind of friendship that survives every other friendship falling away. The one constant in a person's social life regardless of what else changes. Claire hadn't spoken to her in over a year, but Mara answered on the 2nd ring, and when Claire explained why she was calling, there was a long pause on the other end. He'd been different, Mara said finally. The last few months. I kept telling myself it was just, stress. Work stuff. But he was, she trailed off. He kept saying he was finally getting proof. Proof of what? He never said exactly. But Claire, Mara's voice dropped. He talked about your dad. A lot. More than he had in years. He was obsessed with the date. Your dad's death, the actual date. He kept bringing it up like it meant something. After they hung up, Claire sat with the phone in her hands for a long time. Then she typed in the date of her father's death. The phone unlocked. The first thing she saw was the call log. There it was, the 11-minute call from Mom, ending at 11:47 p.m., the night Daniel died. Claire sat at her kitchen table and stared at the timestamp until the numbers stopped looking like numbers and started looking like something else entirely. A door. A question with a shape she didn't want to look at directly yet. Her mother had told police she hadn't spoken to Daniel in over a week. This call had happened hours before he died. She opened his journal app next, the one Mara had mentioned, a private app Daniel had apparently used for months, the entries unlocked now along with everything else. What she found inside took her most of the night to read. Daniel had been documenting things. Methodically, obsessively, in the careful, organized way that had always characterized him when he latched onto something, the same intensity he'd brought to the treehouse as a kid, to every argument he'd ever had, to every grudge he'd ever held onto for too long. He had been investigating their father's death. The early entries were tentative questions, mostly. Inconsistencies he'd noticed in the old police report, which he had apparently requested and obtained months ago. A timeline that didn't quite add up. A witness statement that, according to the file, had been recorded and then according to a follow-up note Daniel had found had mysteriously gone missing from the case file before it ever reached a courtroom, because there had never been a courtroom. The case had been closed as an accident within 2 weeks. Then the entries got more specific. A life insurance payout, substantial, paid out after their father's death. To a company partially owned by a man named Tom Whitfield. Claire knew that name. Tom Whitfield was an old family friend, had been for as long as she could remember. He and her father had been business partners once, decades ago, before some falling out Claire had never fully understood. He still came to family events occasionally. He had been at Daniel's funeral that morning, standing near the back, and Claire had thought nothing of it at the time beyond a vague, familiar recognition. The journal entries grew more urgent as they went on. Daniel had found something, he didn't specify exactly what, not in the early entries, that connected Tom Whitfield to the insurance payout in a way that, in Daniel's words, doesn't make sense unless Dad's death wasn't what we were told. The final entry was dated the day he died. Calling Mom tonight. She needs to hear this from me before I take it anywhere else. She deserves that much. After that, I don't know. But I can't sit on this anymore. Dad deserves better than this. We all do. That was the last entry. Claire didn't sleep that night. In the morning, she drove to her mother's house. Margaret answered the door already looking like she knew, somehow, why Claire had come, a kind of preemptive exhaustion in her face that Claire had never seen before, not even at either funeral. You spoke to Daniel, Claire said. No preamble. The night he died. An 11-minute call. You told the police you hadn't talked to him in over a week. Margaret's face went through several things very quickly and then, abruptly, she sat down at her kitchen table and put her hands over her face. I was so distraught, she said, muffled. Claire, I had just lost my son. I wasn't thinking clearly. I don't even remember half of that week. You don't remember an 11-minute phone call the night he died? I'm asking you to let this go, Margaret said, and her voice had changed, softer now, almost pleading. Please. Whatever Daniel was working himself up about, please, just let him rest. Let all of us have some peace. What was he working himself up about, Mom? Margaret didn't answer. And in the silence that followed, Claire understood with a kind of certainty that arrives all at once, fully formed, impossible to argue yourself out of, that her mother knew exactly what Daniel had been working on. Claire called Detective Reyes that afternoon. He met her at a coffee shop near the precinct, and when she showed him the phone, the call log, the timestamp, the journal entries, she watched his face change in real time. The careful, slightly defensive posture he'd had when he sat down dissolved into something sharper, more focused. This doesn't match her statement, he said quietly, mostly to himself. No. He was quiet for a long moment, turning the phone over in his hands. I need to be straight with you, he said finally. Your brother's case. It closed faster than I was comfortable with. I flagged some things at the time. I was told they weren't relevant. He looked up at her. This might be relevant. He took the phone with Claire's permission, formally, signed and documented, and 2 days later he called her back. The call wasn't just a call, he said. Your brother had his phone set to auto-record video calls. Has been for months. There's a cloud backup. Claire felt something cold move through her chest. It's still there, Reyes said. The recording of that call. It's still on the cloud account. The wait for legal access took 4 days, and they were the longest 4 days of Claire's life. She went to work. She came home. She sat in her apartment in the evenings with the lights off, doing the thing she had been trying not to do since the funeral, replaying, in her mind, what that conversation might have looked like. Reconstructing it from the fragments she had. Daniel, calling their mother, telling her what he'd found. The insurance payout. Tom Whitfield. The witness statement that had disappeared. She imagined her mother's face on the other end of that call. Imagined the exact moment her mother understood that her son knew. She thought about her father's funeral. About Daniel in his too big suit, 15 years old, saying people don't just fall, and being told, by everyone, including her, that he was wrong. That he needed to stop. That he was making things worse. He had been right the entire time. And he had spent 11 years carrying that alone, the way people carry things when nobody believes them, quietly, until eventually they either let it go or it consumes them completely. Daniel had never let it go. When the recording finally came through, Reyes watched it with her. He said, gently, that she didn't have to, that she could wait outside, that he could summarize it for her afterward. Claire said no. She needed to hear it. All of it. The video opened on Daniel's face, tired, tense, sitting in his apartment with the lights low. Mom, he said. I need to talk to you about Dad. Margaret's face, smaller in the corner of the frame, went very still. What followed was 11 minutes that Claire would never fully be able to describe to anyone afterward, because no description could capture the specific horror of watching her brother lay out, calmly and carefully, everything he had found: the insurance payout, Tom Whitfield's involvement, a recording he'd uncovered of an argument between their father and Tom in the final week before their father died, an argument about money, about the business, about something Tom had apparently done that their father had discovered and was threatening to expose. And watching her mother's face as he said all of it. Margaret didn't deny any of it. That was the part that broke something in Claire. Her mother didn't argue. Didn't ask for evidence. Didn't say that's not true. She simply sat there, and her face slowly came apart, and she said in a voice that didn't sound like the composed woman from the funeral, didn't sound like anyone Claire had ever heard before. "I know, Daniel. I've known for 11 years. Daniel went very still. I have known, Margaret said, since the week it happened. And I made a choice. I took the money, and I said nothing, because it kept this family afloat for 11 years, Daniel, and I could not lose everything on top of losing your father. I made a choice to protect what was left. You let it go, Daniel said. His voice was shaking now. You let Tom Whitfield just be in our lives. At Christmas. At my graduation. Knowing what I'm asking you to drop this, Margaret said. I am begging you. Please. Daniel. Please. I can't, Daniel said. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm going to the police in the morning. I have to. He hung up. The recording continued, Daniel, alone now, pacing near the balcony of his apartment, visibly agitated, running his hands through his hair. And then, faintly, in the background audio, a sound that made Claire's entire body go cold. A door opening. A second voice. Someone else had been in the apartment. The recording ended a few seconds later, cut off. Abruptly, the cloud sync apparently triggered by something that interrupted the call. Reyes was already moving before Claire fully processed what she'd heard. He pulled phone records, Margaret's, this time, with the speed that only comes when a case suddenly becomes urgent in a way it hadn't been before. 90 seconds after Margaret hung up with Daniel, she had called Tom Whitfield. The call lasted 4 minutes. And Tom Whitfield's phone records placed him near Daniel's apartment building less than half an hour later. Reyes laid it out for Claire as gently as he could, though there was no gentle way to say any of it. Margaret had called Tom in a panic. Not Reyes was careful about this not to harm Daniel. The evidence suggested she had asked Tom to talk to him, to get him to drop it, to retrieve whatever evidence he had, somehow, before morning. What happened after Tom arrived was something that would likely never be fully reconstructed. But the physical evidence from the scene re-examined now, with new eyes, by people no longer assuming an accident, told a story. A struggle. Daniel's phone, which had been found several feet from his body, screen cracked. The balcony railing, which the original report had noted as unsecured without further comment. Tom hadn't gone there intending to kill anyone. But in the struggle over the phone, over the evidence, over 11 years of silence that Daniel had just threatened to break, and Daniel had fallen. And Margaret, when she found out what had happened, had made one more choice. She had helped make sure it looked like an accident. Claire sat across from her mother for the second time that week, in the same kitchen, and this time Margaret didn't try to deflect. She was crying before Claire even said anything, the kind of crying that comes after someone has run out of the energy required to hold something together. I didn't tell Tom to hurt him, she said. I want you to believe that. I have to believe that, or I don't know how I keep breathing. I just wanted him to talk to Daniel, to make him understand. I never thought. And Dad. Claire's voice was very quiet. Was that an accident too? Or did you know about that too, the whole time? Margaret's face crumpled completely. Tom killed your father, she said. 11 years ago. Over the business. Your father found out Tom had been stealing from the company for years, and he was going to expose him, and Tom. She stopped. Started again. I didn't know beforehand. I want you to know that. I found out after. And then there was the insurance money, and Tom made sure I understood what would happen to all of us, to you, to Daniel, to everything if any of it ever came out. And I was so scared, Claire. I was so scared, and I had 2 children, and I told myself that staying quiet was protecting you both.
You protected the man who killed Dad, Claire said. For 11 years. And then he killed Daniel too. I know, Margaret whispered. I know what I did. I know. Reyes arrived 20 minutes later with warrants for both Margaret and Tom. Claire stood in the doorway of her mother's house and watched 2 officers walk her mother, 61 years old, composed even now in some final, automatic way toward a car. Margaret stopped, just before getting in, and turned back. I didn't help cover it up to protect myself, she said. Her voice was steady now, in the strange, hollow way that comes after someone has nothing left to lose by being honest. I'd already lost your father to Tom. I couldn't lose Daniel too and you, Claire. I couldn't lose you both in the same year, on top of everything else. I know that doesn't make it right. I know there's nothing that makes it right. But I need you to know that's why. Then she got in the car, and it pulled away, and Claire stood alone in the doorway of the house she had grown up in, and didn't move for a long time. A week later, Claire went back to Daniel's grave. It was the first time she had been able to stand there without the specific, suffocating guilt that had defined every moment since the funeral, the guilt of 2 years of silence, of a fight neither of them had ever resolved, of all the things she'd assumed she would have time to fix eventually. That guilt was still there. It would probably always be there, in some form. But it sat differently now. Because she understood, now, what those final months had actually been. Daniel hadn't spent his last months stewing in anger toward her, or toward their family, the way she'd feared. He had spent them trying to find the truth for their father, and in his own way, for both of them. He had been trying to bring something broken back into the light, even knowing she had to believe he knew, on some level, what it might cost him. He hadn't died estranged from her. He had died trying to give them both something to come back together over. That evening, back at her apartment, Claire opened the journal app one more time. She had been through nearly everything on the phone by now, the entries, the call logs, the documents Daniel had gathered. But there was one file she hadn't opened. A voice memo, dated months before his death, long before any of this had started, as far as she could tell. She almost skipped past it. She pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the room, younger sounding, somehow lighter than the tense voice from the recorded call. "Hey, Claire. I know you're probably not going to listen to this. I don't even know if I'm going to send it. I just wanted to say I miss you. I know things have been bad between us, and I know a lot of that's on me. I keep meaning to call and then I don't, because I don't know how to start the conversation without it turning into another fight." A pause. A small laugh. "Anyway, I miss you. I want to fix this. I don't know when, but I do. Okay. That's it. Bye, Claire." The message ended. Claire sat in her apartment, holding her brother's phone, and cried in a way she hadn't let herself cry since the funeral, not for the investigation, not for her mother, not even for the truth about her father. Just for her brother. For the conversation they never got to have. For the message he never sent. He didn't die alone. He died trying to bring our family back together, even if it meant tearing it apart first. Thanks for watching. Let me know where you are watching from. See you in our next story.